Thanks to a 2005 Supreme Court ruling, video games are protected by the First Amendment, but that doesn't mean everything makes it to store shelves. From controversial content to legal issues that cause games to be recalled, and even the town that outlawed Donkey Kong, here are the video games that were banned in the good old USA. Thrill Kill. In the mid-90s, Mortal Kombat set the standard for ultra-violent video games and spawned an entire roster of imitators. The most infamous was Thrill Kill, which is pretty impressive when you consider that the game never actually came out. There were actually a lot of interesting ideas in this one, including a 4-player combat system that basically made it the graphically violent equivalent of Super Smash Bros. Unfortunately, those mechanics never got any attention, because the major selling point touted by Paradox and EA was the bloody cast of serial killers, cannibals, and the dominatrix dismembering each other to get out of hell. With that much adult content, Thrill Kill was given the ESRB's adult-only rating, which in turn caused EA to cancel it only weeks before its intended release date, rather than court the controversy. Since the game was completed and leaked by a few of its frustrated developers, however, it was widely distributed as a bootleg title, and the same engine was used to make Wu-Tang Shaolin Style the following year. X-Men Destiny. An action RPG based on the X-Men seems like it should be a sure thing, but for X-Men Destiny, that wasn't the case. And not just because of reviews that called it a careless, cynical, opportunistic mess that was less enjoyable than burying a beloved family pet. Someone get Bobby Drake in here, cause we need an Iceman for that burn. The real problems came from the battles behind the scenes. In 2007, Silicon Knights launched a lawsuit against Epic Games for breach of contract, claiming that they were sabotaging Destiny by failing to provide them with a functioning version of the Unreal 3 engine. A few years later, it turned out that Silicon Knights had gotten their hands on the new engine anyway, while they initially claimed that they developed a new engine for Destiny and the sci-fi Norse mythology title Too Human. A ruling in 2012 found that they'd actually just used Unreal 3 in breach of contract. All copies of both games, along with a handful of titles that were still in development, were ordered to be recalled and destroyed, and Silicon Knights was hit with $9.2 million in damages, leading to the studio's bankruptcy in 2014. Granny Theft Auto. The story of Granny Theft Auto being delisted from the Microsoft Store seems pretty simple. It was originally uploaded as part of the Xbox Live Creators Program, which allowed any developer to publish a game with a no-concept approval required. Later, it was taken down along with every other game released by its publisher, presumably because it included an unlicensed MIDI of the song Uptown Funk. What makes Granny Theft Auto notable is, well, literally everything else about it. The entire library of games released by an Xbox One user named Xbox is full of low-res fever dreams. Granny Theft Auto, for instance, is a weird open-world driving game that probably seems familiar, except that you mostly drive around looking for gigantic rotating pies or maybe muffins. It's just the tip of the iceberg too. Bazooka Bear Workshop involved running around in a maze, shooting at stuffed teddy bears with a bazooka. And The Simps is sort of like The Sims, except vaguely nightmarish and viscerally upsetting. The kicker? While GTA, not that one, the one with the granny, was technically for sale through the Microsoft Store, it was usually offered up to players for all of 4 cents. Mutiny. As near as we can tell, Mutiny is an erotic visual novel about an airship crewed by a group of lady pirates who are also animal or insect-human hybrids, like for instance a busty moth with 4 arms. You know, standard video game stuff. Needless to say, it's meant for adults, but with the number of sexy visual novel games on Steam, that's not actually that unusual either. In May of 2018, however, Mutiny and a few other titles were singled out for threats of removal, which came as a shock to developers who had been selling their games just fine before that. The difference this time likely stemmed from the massive controversy surrounding a school shooting simulator called Active Shooter, which caused Valve to re-examine their content policies. By June, they had walked back threats of removing Mutiny, instead deciding that they'd let anything go as long as it wasn't illegal or straight-up trolling. Rather than run into any further trouble, however, the developers elected to leave a somewhat censored version on Steam, while also offering a patch that made it completely uncensored for players to download at their website. The Marshfield ban. You might think that it's pretty difficult to find something so offensive in a game like Space Invaders or Pac-Man that legal action would be required, even if the latter features a fully nude protagonist. The citizens of Marshfield, Massachusetts, however, were so worried that video games would lead children to a life of crime that in 1982, they expanded an early 70s ban on all coin-operated amusements to include arcade games. The ban was even upheld by the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, presumably after hearing stories of kids who would steal quarters from their parents just to get a hit bit of that sweet, sweet Donkey Kong high. Fortunately for Marshfield's gamers, the law was finally repealed in 2011, meaning that they no longer had to drive more than 30 miles to Boston and the nearest Chuck E. Cheese just to get some skee ball in. Congratulations on getting your games back, Marshfield, and make sure you check out this thing called Street Fighter. It's gonna blow your mind.